Burkina Faso and Mali are making bold moves to assert their authority, causing a significant upheaval in West Africa. Recently, these three nations jointly declared their immediate withdrawal from the Economic Community of West African States.
In early 2024, the governments of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, all led by military transitional regimes, made a move that really shook West Africa. They formally announced their withdrawal from the Economic Community of West African States, or Ecowas. Their reasons weren't vague. They accused Ecowas of interfering in their domestic affairs, failing to assist in the fight against terrorism, and aligning itself too closely with Western powers at the expense of African interests. In response, they formed a new bloc, the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES, with the goal of defending sovereignty and, creating a shared path forward. This political divorce hasn't been smooth. ECOWAS quickly responded with punitive measures, economic sanctions, suspensions, and service withdrawals. And now, tensions have escalated even further, with stark consequences for everyday citizens in these countries. In a public statement that has reverberated across the continent, Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso did not hold back. He accused ECOWAS countries, and by extension their Western backers, of weaponizing basic services like electricity and medicine. When thousands of Nigerians died in hospital beds due to lack of electricity or medicine, that is a crime. And those responsible for the sanctions must also be held responsible for those deaths. According to Traoré, some neighboring states have cut off electricity supplies and shut down port access to landlocked AES countries like Burkina Faso and Mali, even though payments for these services were still being made. These moves, he argued, are not just undiplomatic but outright violations of international protocols. He put it this way: they are trying to make our populations suffer. They want people to revolt against their own leaders, but that strategy has failed. He claims that these actions have forced countries like Mali to raise electricity prices on their own citizens, and honestly, even then, shortages continue. More than just economic pressure, these measures are seen as an attempt to reverse military-led changes through indirect sabotage. As Traoré put it, they banned food exports to us. That's fine. But when their time limit expires, we will ban the entry of those same products into our country. Traoré's tone was, defiant. His message was clear. They are ready to stand on their own, ready to cut ties with what they see as a colonial structure dressed up in African clothing. But others see it differently. A rival voice, fiery and frustrated, has argued that the withdrawal from ECOWAS is both illegal and dangerous. According to this viewpoint, the Sahel military leaders are not legitimate. They are soldiers who seized power by force and now refuse to play by the rules of democratic governance. Democrats cannot sit with those in military uniforms who took over power with guns. They are supposed to be guarding the gates, not running governments. Now, as the dust settles, the debate moves to the courts and the markets. Legal experts and economists are weighing in, trying to figure out what happens next. There's a lot at stake here, not just for the countries involved, but for the whole region. People are asking, who gets to decide if the withdrawal is valid? What does it mean for trade, for jobs, and for the everyday lives of millions? The answers, honestly, are still up in the air. He dismissed the AES withdrawal letter as a farce. In his view, these regimes were already suspended for breaching ECOWAS rules and had no legal standing to resign from a club they were no longer part of. He even likened it to bandits taking over schools and then trying to opt out of the education system altogether. If someone commits a crime and then tries to leave the system to avoid judgment, you don't let them walk away. You hold them accountable. He warned that legitimizing their withdrawal would only normalize military takeovers. And in his eyes, ECOWAS still holds authority over the 15 West African nations, regardless of recent declarations. This, AES, it's illegal. There's only one recognized bloc, and that's ECOWAS. Everyone, the United Nations, African Union, China, Russia, knows this. That tension between the ideal of Pan-African sovereignty and the reality of regional law and governance has become the heart of this conflict. And it's not just words. According to sources, cases have already been filed in the ECOWAS Court of Justice. A 30-day response window was reportedly given to the Commission, and if unanswered, the implication is guilt by silence. But the Sahel leaders are not backing down. Their movement is gaining traction, particularly among younger Africans. To many, Traoré's boldness represents a new kind of leadership, one that isn't afraid to challenge the status quo or reject Western control over Africa's resources. So, it's worth noting that since expelling France from Niger, government reports claim uranium revenues have skyrocketed. jumping from $1 billion to $300 billion annually. That's a staggering difference if accurate. And honestly, it adds weight to the growing argument that Africa has long been exploited for its wealth. In Burkina Faso, similar figures are cited. Gold that was once sold for €300 per ounce is now reportedly fetching €1,300 per ounce under state-controlled mining. Whether exaggerated or not, these claims are fueling a pretty powerful narrative that breaking ties with old powers could unlock Africa's true potential. But it comes at a cost. Electricity shortages, trade bans, regional isolation. Still, Traoré remains firm. We have learned lessons. Now we must build our own systems, control our own economy, defend our own sovereignty. This is more than a political standoff. It's a clash between two visions for Africa's future, one rooted in multilateral stability, the other in national independence. As the alliance of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger doubles down on their exit from Ecowas, the effects are spreading far beyond politics. Power cuts, closed ports, and economic sanctions are no longer theoretical. They are being felt in hospitals, markets, and homes across the Sahel, and both sides of this divide are accusing each other of playing dirty. In Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré says the fight is about dignity and survival. He believes the sanctions are proof that Ecowas is not acting in the interest of African people, but rather in service of foreign interests. When you cut off electricity to a country just because its leaders refuse to follow your instructions, you're not defending democracy. You're punishing sovereignty. Traoré didn't just blame ECOWAS, he blamed the broader international silence. He pointed out that no one condemned the port closures even though they violate international norms by targeting landlocked nations that depend on external routes for basic trade. Critics of ECOWAS argue the same thing, that it reacts with speed and anger when military governments emerge. But it rarely says anything when civilians are massacred by terrorists or when foreign powers exploit African resources. Traoré's supporters see his leadership as a symbol of African resistance, a man unafraid to reject Western mining deals, to nationalize resources, and to build African wealth for Africans. Honestly, it's no surprise that he's becoming a hero among young people across the continent. And when the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia offered to build 200 mosques for Burkina Faso during Ramadan, Traoré's response really made waves. We have enough mosques. What we need are schools, hospitals, and factories. Our people need to be educated, healthy, and employed. That statement, simple but bold, went viral. It spoke to a deeper frustration among African youth, that leaders often accept symbolic gifts while the real problems, unemployment, poverty, broken systems, go unresolved. For many, Traoré's rejection wasn't disrespectful. It was visionary. But not everyone sees this as a new dawn. Opponents of the Sahel alliance argue that military takeovers, no matter how well-intentioned, are not a path to lasting stability. They believe democracy, not dictatorship, is the only way to guarantee freedoms and accountability. And to them, ECOWAS was right to act. One official said bluntly, "These are soldiers with guns, not elected leaders. They belong in the field, not in the palace." He compared it to dogs meant to guard a house turning around and taking control of it, saying that no matter how disciplined the dog, it's still not the master. So, when it comes to the tension between soldiers and elected leaders, it's really about who holds the true power. Soldiers might take control by force, but elected leaders, well, they're supposed to represent the people's will. Now, let's talk about the legal and economic consequences, because honestly, they're pretty significant. When a country decides to withdraw or get suspended from a regional body, it can face sanctions, trade restrictions, and, a lot of diplomatic isolation. This can seriously impact the economy, making life harder for everyday folks. Plus, there are legal debates about whether these withdrawals are even valid, especially if the governments in question came to power through unconstitutional means. For these critics, ECOWAS remains the legitimate regional authority, and they believe the Sahel state's letter of withdrawal holds no legal weight, especially coming from governments that seized power through coups. To add pressure, a lawsuit was filed in the Ecowas Court of Justice challenging the withdrawal process. With no formal reply from the Commission within the given time frame, the case is now moving forward, and its outcome could either legitimize the breakaway or declare it invalid. Meanwhile, supporters of the Sahel bloc aren't waiting around. They're working to develop internal electricity systems, explore new trade partnerships with Russia, China, and Turkey, and build infrastructure that reduces dependence on Western allies. It's part of what Traoré calls the beginning of a Pan-African renaissance. And others may follow. Nations like Guinea, Chad, and even Congo have shown signs of dissatisfaction with Ecowas or Western-aligned African institutions. If they join the Sahel bloc, it could drastically shift the balance of power on the continent. But the road ahead is, well, uncertain. Can the Sahel states build enough internal strength to survive isolation? Will Ecowas escalate with further sanctions or even military threats? And most importantly, how will everyday citizens, farmers, be affected in the long term? Traders be affected in the long term? Students be affected in the long term? Across the continent, the debate rages on. Some see Traoré as a bold reformer ushering in Africa's true independence. Others see him as a reckless soldier risking regional chaos for the sake of pride and defiance. But there's one thing nobody is denying. Africa is changing. Old alliances are being questioned. Old systems are being challenged. And the choices made today, by governments, institutions, and people, will define what the next generation inherits. Here at Afri Plus News Channel, we don't pretend to have all the answers, but we believe in asking the right questions, in amplifying African voices, in holding both leaders and institutions accountable, military or civilian. We stand for truth, justice, and sovereignty, without violence, without manipulation. Africa's voice will not be silenced. In a world dominated by carefully curated headlines, filtered soundbites, and edited speeches, one voice from Africa has chosen to speak outside the bounds of media control. That voice belongs to 34-year-old Ibrahim Traoré, the military leader of Burkina Faso, who recently delivered a speech unlike any the West has heard in decades. I'm archiving every distortion, and today, I'm pulling off your masks. There is no diplomatic tone, no rehearsed soundbite, just raw words aimed at Western powers and media establishments that, for generations, have shaped the world's perception of Africa. In his eyes, they've not just distorted Africa's image, but also engineered its suffering. We were ashamed of ourselves, ashamed of our own lands, of our own people. But as he grew, he read, he questioned. And what he found, he says, was a lie, a carefully crafted narrative that masked the true wealth, resilience, and humanity of Africa. This narrative, he argues, serves a purpose. The media's depiction of Africa as helpless, chaotic, and dependent isn't just offensive, it's strategic. Because if Africa is seen as backward, then Western intervention appears noble. If Africa is poor, then exploitation seems like charity. But Traoré pushes back hard against this portrayal with cold, undeniable facts. He points to the continent's wealth in natural resources. 70% of the world's cobalt, essential for phones, laptops, and electric cars, comes from Congo, where most citizens can't afford the very devices they power. 90% of the planet's platinum, used in electronics and medical tech, lies beneath South African soil. Yet South Africans face crushing unemployment. 30% of the world's gold pours from African nations like Mali, Ghana, and Burkina Faso, but the people remain buried in poverty. 65% of all diamonds come from Botswana, Angola, Sierra Leone, and Congo. But miners still live on $1 a day. 35% of uranium reserves used to power Europe's nuclear plants come from Africa. Yet African homes sit in darkness. And it makes you wonder, how was Africa kept poor while being so rich? His answer? The system never ended, it simply evolved. Colonialism today doesn't wear a military uniform, it wears a business suit. Instead of invasion, there are contracts. Instead of whips, there are credit lines. Traoré accuses multinational corporations of exploiting Africa with deals that leave the continent hollowed out. He names names. Glencore, a Swiss mining giant, earned $256 billion in 2022, while paying Congo just 0.2% of that in taxes. Rio Tinto, a British-Australian firm, extracts millions of tons of bauxite from Guinea. The result? Pollution and cancer. Total Energies, a French oil titan, pulls billions in profit from Angola and Nigeria while leaving behind dirty pipelines and despair. Anglo-American, founded in South Africa, now based in London, has taken diamonds, platinum, and iron, yet left 6 million South Africans unemployed. But Traoré insists this is just the visible tip of a deeper structure, one built on hidden deals, offshore accounts, and financial sleight of hand. He claims that while Africa receives around $4 billion in aid each year, it loses over $88 billion annually through illegal financial flows. And let's be real, as Traoré puts it, Africa is not receiving aid. Africa is giving aid. So this is done, he explains, through a 5-step formula. First, create corruption, by bribing leaders and offering their families a life of Western luxury. Second, secure long-term concessions, tax breaks, environmental exemptions, and, a total disregard for labor laws. Third, control infrastructure, from mines to ports but never to schools or villages. Fourth, deploy private security, to protect company assets and suppress unrest. And fifth, silence the media, both locally and globally, just to maintain the illusion. As Ibrahim Traoré puts it, it's been working like this for 100 years, and you don't see this system because you're part of it. He then turns his gaze directly to Western media giants, accusing them of complicity. Their top advertisers, he claims, are the very companies exploiting Africa: oil, mining, pharmaceutical, and arms conglomerates. These entities don't just sell products, they sell narratives that keep the truth buried. The exploitation, is often hidden in plain sight. It's woven into the fabric of everyday life, shaping economies, governments, and even the stories people tell themselves. The system thrives on silence and on the comfortable distance that keeps most folks from seeing the real cost. It's a cycle that, for far too long, has gone unchallenged. As the speech progresses, Traoré's words grow more direct, not angry, but deeply resolved. What he reveals next will be covered in Part 2, France's grip through colonial currencies, Britain's financial laundering empire, America's military presence, and China's silent expansion. Ibrahim Traoré pulled back the curtain on Africa's immense wealth and how, despite its abundance in natural resources, its people remain shackled by poverty. Now, in the second part of his explosive speech, he takes direct aim at the systems behind the exploitation and the countries that continue to benefit from them. One of the first targets is France. Traoré highlights how French colonialism may have changed form, but it never disappeared. 14 African countries still use the CFA franc, a colonial currency designed during France's rule. But here's the twist: 50% of their central bank reserves still sit in the French treasury. And France doesn't just hold the money. It applies negative interest rates, meaning these African nations are paying France for the privilege of storing their own cash. Through this financial arrangement, Traoré says France quietly transfers $500 billion worth of resources from Africa each year. Yet, when France gives just 10 billion euros in aid, it's splashed across headlines as a gesture of goodwill. No one writes about the 500 billion, but everyone writes about the 10. He doesn't stop at France. He turns to Britain, calling its system, more sophisticated. London, Traoré explains, is the world's top destination for money laundering. The City of London, along with its network of offshore tax havens like Jersey, Guernsey, the Cayman Islands, and the Virgin Islands, all under British control, has become the hiding place for Africa's stolen wealth. Every penny stolen from Africa passes through London. Africa's wealth hides there. Next comes the United States. Traoré accuses America of using its military to maintain control, not under the guise of empire, but through security. Through AFRICOM, the United States Africa Command, there are now 46 American military bases on African soil. The official story is that these are for counter-terrorism, but Traoré suggests otherwise. They say fighting terrorism, but it's not terrorists they target. It's the people's leaders. Every day, he claims, American drones circle above African skies. Surveillance, listening, mapping, not to protect, but to monitor, influence, and control the movement of resources. This, according to Traoré, is the new battlefield: silent, digital, and strategic. And then there's China, the latest player in Africa's great game. Traoré is clear. China builds, it lends, it invests, but at a cost. 99-year port leases, exclusive mining rights, and vast swaths of agricultural land are quietly changing hands. While China avoids the rhetoric of Western imperialism, Traoré says it's still practicing a familiar form of controlled debt trap diplomacy. Ask Sri Lanka, ask Zambia, they know the price. But perhaps the most damning part of his address isn't about foreign governments. It's about the media. Traoré calls out major outlets by name: The New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, Le Monde. He accuses them of filtering the truth, of shaping public opinion to protect the very interests that profit from Africa's exploitation. He points to media ownership as a core issue. Jeff Bezos owns The Washington Post. Rupert Murdoch controls Fox News, The Times, The Wall Street Journal. Carlos Slim, a Mexican billionaire whose wealth stems from telecom monopolies, is the largest shareholder in The New York Times. Their backgrounds, Traoré argues, aren't rooted in journalism. They're rooted in wealth, profit, and power. And it's not just about ownership, it's about worldview. He asks, who are the editors? Where did they study? Harvard, Yale, Oxford, Cambridge, the same elite schools, the same filtered lens, the same blind spots. These are the people shaping how Africa is seen. Yet many don't even speak a single African language. How many languages does your Africa correspondent speak? French, English, that's all. What about Swahili, Hausa, Yoruba? For Traoré, the core issue isn't just how Africa is treated, it's how the truth about Africa is buried. A network of media silence, financial manipulation, and military pressure works together to keep Africa in a constant state of perceived helplessness. And as long as that perception continues, the real story, the theft of a continent's future, goes untold. But he's no longer asking the West to tell that story. I am truth. And this time, you cannot turn off your microphones. Traoré's words may never make it to a front page. They may never be quoted on primetime TV, but the message is out. In the age of digital networks and decentralized media, the monopoly on narrative is slipping. Africa, once spoken for, is now speaking for itself. What do you think? Is Africa finally being heard? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Support the work by liking this video and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on stories.